This is the Tree of Life, Season 4, Chapter 8. In this episode, we will be talking about two distinct equilibriums associated with spatial non-consensuality and archetypal consensuality. To start off, lateral action is associated with a specific kind of equilibrium of body homeostasis. Specifically, the homeostatic equilibrium is established by the interplay between the hormones cortisol and oxytocin in the brain and body. When the equilibrium is dominated by oxytocin, cortisol levels are lower and vice versa. Within this equilibrium, oxytocin levels are mediated by reciprocation through the internet, social media, and lateral action with respect to other social actors. Dopamine, also linked to oxytocin, is reflected in this activation. Cortisol levels are stimulated by deference, that is, by the release of adrenaline, due to the flight or fight response. These levels are also associated with hypothyroidism, which is linked to lower rates of encoding of epigenetic information in the brain and body. The first type of equilibrium is mediated by the internet through social reciprocation. When one interacts on the internet, or through social reciprocation with the outgroup, or through social intersections mediated by the internet, the result is external regulation of oxytocin levels. This means that in this type of equilibrium, an individual's homeostatic equilibrium is determined by the system of control operating to monitor and impose a specific oxytocin, a cortisol equilibrium in the brain and body. Which is to say, that this equilibrium is described by lateral action. This state is described by higher rates of encoding of local epigenetic information, hypothyroidism, the spatial non-consensual state. In other words, this system monitors homeostasis of a social actor and determines their homeostatic equilibrium by directly manipulating their oxytocin levels through regulated reciprocation on the internet. In this type of equilibrium, the social actor's action occurs within a broadening of a linear path to multiple paths, such that lateral action is possible, that is to say, moving from one path to another. This is possible because underlying the higher rates of epigenetic encoding associated with a spatial non-consensual state is a kind of genetic synchronicity. That is to say that two individuals who are locally manifesting higher rates of epigenetic encoding have the potential to act laterally, or join into a single path through reciprocation. In the second type of equilibrium, defined by lack of engagement with the reciprocation of others, described by linear action, the individual's equilibrium of body homeostasis is determined by cortisol levels, that is deference. In this state, they exhibit lower rates of encoding of epigenetic information, that is, they exist within an archetypal consensual state. In this case, the action of deference causes the convergence of paths into a single linear path, making lateral action impossible. This is archetypal consensuality. Spatial non-consensuality is associated with spatial territoriality, whereas archetypal consensuality is associated with archetypal territoriality, or intellectual territory. The system is currently acting to eliminate the territoriality of archetypal consensual actors, that is, retained linearly, by leveraging the transition of those individuals into nonlinearity, which is the equilibrium mediated by the system of control. In this state, these archetypal consensual actors maintain higher rates of genetic synchronicity by acting on every impulse within the nonlinear space. Thus, spatial non-consensuality is associated with lateral action, which is to say, path convergence by genetic synchronicity through encoding of epigenetic information locally. Archetypal consensuality is associated with linear action within linearity and exhibits less epigenetic plasticity. That's the end of the podcast for today.